Okay, so we're recording. And so in the Q&A session, what I want to do today is I have a couple of, questions, and then I want to talk about a couple of issues that that are going to come up in the modeling, and then I'll just open it up for general questions. So let me share my screen here. Share my screen. There we go. And I don't want my video while I'm doing that. Okay, you guys see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so let me just go over a couple of things really quickly, and then we will, as I said, I'll open it up if you guys have any other questions. First of all, for case study 5, I mentioned verification, and I mentioned this after Garrett's talk on Tuesday. This is something you should start now, because the model, if you looked at case study 5, hopefully is not substantially different than what you had for case study 4. So you basically just have to add work schedules and get going. And since a verification report is a deliverable, you have to do it. You might as well do it in the most efficient way. And the most efficient way I can guarantee you is to do it first before you start doing experimentation. So I wanted to reiterate that. And I will probably reiterate it again when we meet on Tuesday, because it's important. So I want to just talk a little bit about incorporating work schedules and in terms of dashboard interpretations. So what I'm going to show you here is this is my version of the baseline model for case study 5. And when you incorporate work schedules, what you're going to notice if you look at the resource plan here, for example, that we have all of these off shift times. So we're not running 24/7 anymore. So every day you have a work period followed by a meal or lunch period, followed by a work period, followed by 16 hours of downtime, right? And so when you look at the resource log, that kind of shows up, when you look at the resource plan, it shows up here as these hatched lines, meaning that you're off shift. And so when I said dashboard interpretations can change, if you look, let me go back and look at my dashboards here. And so, for example, if I look at my simple dispatch list and go to, say, the symbol, we see here that the processing time is 20%. So we have this large off shift time, right? And so you have to, as I said, the interpretation changes. So if I were to say, for example, what's the utilization of this assemble 1? Well, 20.33% is really not what we would consider the utilization, because that 20.33 considers the entire 24-hour day, and you have all of this off shift time. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So that interpretation, since now we have off shift time, is a little bit different. Similarly, if you look at one of the other dashboards, if I look at the make span, for example, it includes the total time. So start to end, and it also is going to include all of that off shift time. Now, whether that is what you consider make span or whether you consider make span as the total amount of work time, again, is a matter of interpretation. And then lastly, one of the other ones that we did, we looked at, let's see, which one do we look at? If we look at our simple scorecard, this total changeover time, same thing, right? And so we have 559 changeovers in this run, 5,000 total changeover time hours. But if I look at my resource log again, or my resource plan again, and I just sort of look at my changeover operator, if I can find one here, you're going to see that some of these changeovers span off shift time. Let's see if I can find one here. Yeah, there's one right there. Well, here's two right here. So you can see this changeover. Here's the changeover operator, and this changeover incorporated this shift time. I'm sorry, the off shift time. So that started here and ended here. But when you look at the time of the changeover time itself shouldn't include that off shift time. But the way it's computed, at least the way it's computed in this dashboard, incorporates that, and that's why this number is so big. And so I gave you 2 suggestions here. I guess one suggestion for this, and one other comment that I want to make sure that you remember. How do I get back to my slides? There are my slides. First of all, periodic statistics might help here. And so, Eliana, give me a second. I see that you have your hand up. Periodic statistics could help here. periodic statistics is a relatively new feature of Simio, and I've never used them. So that's something that you should look at. But unfortunately, I can't give you any guidance in how to do it. That's something that's worth looking at. And then secondly, don't forget about the standard pivot grid. So remember, if you go and I look at my detailed results here, what I did is just took the pivot grid and then just made two simple views. So I can have my schedule, I just filtered it out and have my scheduled utilization views. And so this, the pivot grid is going to report that scheduled utilization that doesn't consider the off shift time. Okay, and so then by filtering it and creating a dedicated view, it's really easy for me to extract that information that I want when I do multiple runs. And then also I did the same thing for changeovers, and I just extracted the changeover time. And so now we have a total number of hours and a total number of changeovers. So the total number of changeovers is the same as you see in the dashboard, but that total time is vastly different because this measure of the time does not include that off shift time. So just that couple of things about interpretation now that we've incorporated work schedules. Okay, Eliana, do you have a question for me?
Actually, well, it was about the schedule utilization, because I think the way that Simio computers it is with the, like, we could compute it with the resource capacity log, because you actually can see like if the resource is scheduled and utilized.
Okay.
My question was if in that log they still consider utilized when it's in the off shift. I think no, yeah.
I don't think it should be utilized in the off shift. I mean, if I ask you what the utilization is, of a resource, what I'm really interested in is how busy is it when it's available.
Okay, yeah.
And if I incorporate it like the standard dashboard did that we built, the number's right. So that 20%, if I go look at these dashboard, if I look at the dashboard here and go my dashboard report and then go back to the standard, these numbers are right. That it's processing 19% of the time and it's off shift 76% of the time. So those numbers are correct. Just the interpretation of this being utilization, to me, that's not the utilization. Okay. So again, a subtle difference. It's not that one's wrong. It's just that the interpretation changes because now we have this big chunk of off shift time. And there's probably a way to create a dashboard that incorporates that does just the that just as the what we consider to be the true utilization. I just don't know what it is.
That's what I'm saying. I did it and it's working with another log table.
Okay.
If you work with the same log table, they're gonna still consider processing as like the utilization, but it is not. Yeah, it's only when it's utilized.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Okay, so that's that question. Then I have something I want to point out. For dashboards, first of all, consider creating output tables. If so dashboards, the ones that we've seen so far, you can use the logs that are created and then you can use the data tables, but don't forget also that you can create output tables. So if there's something you'd like to use in a dashboard, but that information is not available in any of the tables that we currently have, you can create an output table. And with an output table in Simio, again, you can write rows as the model's running, right? And so you could create an output table that has whatever data that you'd like to capture in a dashboard, and then you'll be able to extract that information after the run. So again, don't forget that about that capability. And then finally about dashboards is I'm about to post a new video that on Canvas, hopefully later this afternoon, from an internal Simio workshop where they were talking about dashboards. And so it's, there'll be some useful information there, especially if you're interested in doing, the extra credit part where I want you to make some cool dashboard and all that. You're going to hear a couple of the Simio people talking to the other Simio people about some dashboard techniques and tips and all that kind of stuff. So look for that. I'm just trying to edit out some customer specific information right now, and hopefully I'll have that up a little bit later this evening. Okay, so then I have this comment or question. I think Eliana, you asked this question about the expected operation time. So this server dot processing time. So I want to spend a couple of seconds talking about this because I did talk to the Simio people about this. So if I go and look at a server or a server derived object like our AE servers here, you know, one of the things that we have in this advanced option is this expected operation time. So you have an expected operation time property expression, right, that you use if you have a dynamic dispatching rule where you do something like shortest processing time or longest processing time or critical ratio or something, one of the metrics that requires the processing time, this is where they get it. And the default here is server dot processing time. The problem here is that our servers in this model don't have standard times, right? They use task sequences. So the question that Eliana asked was, well, does this expression take into consideration the task? And the answer is no. This expression only gives you the processing time. And so since we don't have a processing time, this expression is going to be 0. So if you want to use shortest processing time or longest processing time or any of those, you're going to have to go in here and build the expression to compute the time. So in our case, it would be, you know, that setup time, the processing time times the quantity and the finish time, right? So you could just put that expression right here and it would actually compute that. Okay, does that make sense? What that's not going to compute all the time is the sequence dependent changeovers and stuff like that. So what that would give, you know, if I were to go in and say, you know, from our data table, from our routing table, you know, if I have setup time and then quantity times process time and then finish time, it's going to give us that estimate of that actual processing time. So if you want to use that, or if the dispatching rules that you're using are time based, you're going to have to make that modification. Okay. Questions about that? Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about today, before I ask for any other questions, is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this notion of producing materials and task sequences. We talked about this in class a little bit. Someone brought it up in the discussion forum, and I talked about it in class, and I want to revisit that topic. And so if you remember, what I'm talking about is, if you think about an order, like let's say I have an ABC module order here, that we're consuming the component materials here, we're consuming some paint or finish here, we're consuming a box here for those, or a set of boxes for those modules. And then at some point we need to actually produce the module A's or B's or C's or whatever the module is, right? So we have to use a produce step. And the question came up is, where do we do that? And what I did in the model was, I have an add-on process. So I just decided when it entered the sink, that I would just use the process, use a produce step. And so that's what you see right here, is I just say, okay, I'm going to produce. And what I'm producing is the material in the order times the quantity. One of the things that we talked about was also incorporating that produce here. So if I look in package here, and we talked about this in the context of the modules XYZ, where we actually could produce them here, right? So we could go in the task sequence here and say, well, let's use this material requirements, right? So we use material requirements here to consume the raw materials, but we can also use the material requirements to produce the finished goods, okay? But what I mentioned was that can be a little bit problematic because we don't actually have the materials in the bill of materials. And because we have this bill of materials table specified as the reference table, then there's an inconsistency if we try to produce something that's not in the bill of materials table, right? So we look at the bill of materials table here. My bill of materials, let's just go to bill of materials for let's say module A, right? And so module A, my bill of materials, component A, component B, component C. Then at finish, we have paint, and then at package, we have box. But nowhere in that bill of materials table do we say that we are going to produce module A, right? So we're consuming the raw materials, but we have this produce step at the end, but that's not in the bill of materials table. So the inconsistency that we see is in the task sequence right here. Since we've specified that reference table, that Simio unfortunately inconsistently handles when you're trying to produce something that's not in that table. And so I don't want to get into all of the technical details because it would be not very helpful for you, but let me just suggest that the easiest way to avoid problems with this approach is to just not produce or consume unless it's in the bill of materials table. And so in our model, the easiest way is to just produce outside of the task sequence. And if you remember when I did the ISA 95 templates, remember those templates in the bill of materials table explicitly have the produce step. So they have the raw material and then they have the finished goods. And so if you want to look at that ISA 95 template or the scheduling discrete part production and see how they do it, that's doable. But again, my recommendation is to not try to consume and produce anything that doesn't explicitly appear in the bill of materials table. The problem with doing it is, as I said, Simio unfortunately handles it a little bit inconsistently, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So the easiest solution is to just not try to do it. Okay? Does that make sense? You guys understand what the point I'm making here? Hopefully silence is acceptance and that you do understand. Yes. Okay. So that's all the information or all the questions and comments that I had for today. I'm happy to answer any other questions you guys have. Anybody?
Dr. Smith.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah. As for case study 5 and for the verification and validation part, how should our report? When I think of the report, it's a bit unclear for me.
When you think of what, how should one more time? Are you asking about the report?
Look like, and because it's completely will be depending on everybody's approach, right?
Well, I mean, the report, think about what verification is. So verification, you are trying to convince someone that your model does what you think it does. So you have something in mind that you want your model to do, right? And the specification for the model is in the assignment. So I've given you a specification saying, you know, the parts should follow a particular routing, you have particular processing times, you consume raw materials according to the bill of materials, right? So that specification is there. And so the verification is ensuring that your model actually does that. Okay, so there's all of these steps that you want to verify. So you want to verify that your sequences are correct. So in other words, if I have a module A, that it goes from kit to assemble, to finish, to package, where if I have a module X, it goes from kit to assemble to ship, right? You want to verify that that happens. If I am producing, you know, a particular module, I want to verify that it does consume the bill of materials as specified. So if I'm doing a module A, you know, it consumes 1 component A and 2 component Bs and 4 component Cs, I think, right?
Okay. Yeah.
That's the specification, and you want to show, okay, it does do that. Okay. That's what verification is. And so the verification report, think of it as this way, is that you were trying to convince me that your model's correct. Okay. And that's what it is. And so if you were doing this for a client, if you were doing this as a consulting job, you're trying to convince the client that your model is correct, that you have implemented the model correctly. And so that report is what they look at to be convinced. Okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So also I have some questions about the verification process. Can I share my screen?
Yep, let me stop sharing. I've got to set it and let you share. Advanced sharing. All participants. Okay, you should be able to share now.
No, I just want to be sure because it could be so like we can include so many things in that verification thing, yeah?
That's a great point. Yeah, verification, remember, verification, you can't prove it. right? You're just collecting evidence.
Yeah, but my question is more about like, can I just mention it, like, for example, in here, like, if I'm verifying if the processing time is what it's supposed to be. So if I use this Gantt chart,
Yeah.
should
So
I
you can
just
look at,
describe it, or should I also like?
I mean, you can look at this Gantt chart and say, okay, OEM3, kit 1, you know, you can look at the time, you can look at the phases, it
Yeah.
shows the tasks, right? It shows all that. You can do things like say, okay, I switched from a module A to a module X. Here's the
And there is
sequence dependent changeover.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
But should we
that is
include that
verification.
screenshots and all of that? Or?
That is verification. Exactly. That's what
Okay.
you're going to say.
Okay, but because it's gonna be a lot of things there.
It is.
I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, so like, for example, when you show me this one, I mean, you don't have to have the entire screenshot for every little thing.
Okay. Okay,
You know?
yeah. Like we'll give one example of if I'm verifying if actually the replenishment is occurring, so I can show like for one of the components and then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the verification report, you know, can be involved because you're trying to convince people that your model's right.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of steps to that.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want it to be 50 pages. I don't want to see everything. So for example, what you brought up about, you know, material consumption. Okay, so, you know, if you have one module and it consumes the right bill of materials, then you can just say, I also checked the other ones and they similarly work. You don't need to prove it. You
Okay.
just need to show how you checked it. And then you just say, I checked the other ones, but here's the example of me checking A or X or whatever.
Okay, thank you. And I have a short question about case study 4 report.
Okay.
So my question is like, in the last question you're asking us to come up with a like set of dispatching rules that can minimize the make span as the like priority matrix, or I don't know. But of course we know that if we really minimize that make span, we're gonna maybe get worse on all of the metrics, you know?
Yep.
So we just need to mention that and that's it, or should we try different and try to get a balance between like?
No, I mean, in case study 4, there's no balance. I specifically said minimize make span. In case study 5, there's a balance.
Okay.
Case study 4 is just minimize make span. And I understand that you're going to, some of the other metrics will
really
be bad, will get worse. You know,
Yes.
and ideally, you know, you would want to have the minimum make span subject to some constraints on fill rate or something like that. But I didn't ask you that. For this one, it's just minimize make span. And then in the second one, in case study 5, you have to do a balance thing.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Just last question, but it's about the extra credit.
It's about what?
It's the extra credit.
Okay.
Okay, so I know that if we're gonna make the videos, because we are creating like a dashboard that is interesting for the class. So what you want us to do is also to use another like options or different things more than the ones that you show us in the video. Am I right?
Yep.
And should we work with the data from the case studies, or should
Ideally, you would
whatever?
have the data from the case study so that we can post the model too. So with the video, I mean, we're going to post a model. And so it's not a strict requirement, but again, you can use output tables. So you could create any data that you want, you know?
Okay.
I mean, again, if you say, I can make a really cool dashboard, but I need to have a totally different model, that's fine. It's just going to be easier because we have to have the models, you know, so you have to post the model with the dashboard, because the idea is that someone will be able to replicate what you did and see the idea, you know, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
I'm reading, Ethan, your note right here, your chat. Give me a second. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And I totally dropped the ball on that because I meant to make the verification report a requirement for case study 3 and totally forgot. So yeah, absolutely. I should have done it earlier, and we should have been talking about it the whole time in a lot more detail. We mentioned verification early, but I should have been much more explicit in saying we're going to have to do this, and then case study 4 and then case study 5 are all going to be follow-ons. So thanks for that. Thanks for that recommendation. And future offerings of the course will benefit from your pain.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Feel free to email or post on Canvas if anything else comes up. Other than that, I will see everybody on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.